I said step back, Marcus Trent barked, brandishing the taser like it gave him a badge. She's obstructing the fire lane. That's an HOA violation. My wife was already trembling beside the car, one hand on her swollen belly, the other gripping the door handle for balance. 7 months pregnant, dizzy from the stairs, she'd barely been parked for 2 minutes. I just needed to sit, she whispered. Marcus stepped forward. The prongs hit before I could shout. The crack of electricity tore through the courtyard, and Amara collapsed onto the concrete like her body had given up, trying to protect the life inside it. That was the moment the HOA officer tased my pregnant wife. What Marcus didn't know? I'm a federal judge. He turned smug, already justifying it to the empty sidewalk. She wasn't following instructions. I gave a lawful, "You're not law enforcement," I said. "You're an HOA volunteer with a $40 taser in a complex." He blinked, thrown off. "You violated Section 203 of the Residential Use of Force Statute, which means this isn't your problem anymore. It's mine, and I have jurisdiction." If you've ever felt that surge of power when standing up to bullies, hit subscribe now. This showdown is about to become a masterclass in fighting back. He tried to recover. "Sir, this curb is clearly redlined. My mother petitioned to keep this curb accessible for emergencies 20 years ago. The board approved it. There's no signage, no posted regulation, and no authority for physical escalation." I dropped to my knees beside Amara. Her eyes were closed. Her pulse was weak. "My name is Nathaniel Cross. I've ruled on civil rights cases, sentenced corrupt officials, and prosecuted municipal abuse. But today, I was just a husband, watching a so-called officer drop the woman I love on the exact bricks where my mother planted the first garden beds of this neighborhood. That's not metaphor. Her name's on the brass plate beneath the bench behind us. This garden was her legacy. Amara and I moved here to honor it, after years of failed IVF, after hospitals, procedures, and prayers. We bought this house to raise the daughter we'd never thought we'd have. And now? My wife was twitching on the pavement, tasered by a man in cargo pants who thought security meant power without consequence. The paramedics arrived fast. Lopez, the EMT, barely glanced at me before radioing vitals. "BP dropping, fetal heart rate unstable." They lifted Amara with care, moving quickly. Her fingers found mine for half a second before slipping away. I stood slowly and faced Marcus. "Consider this your last night acting like a cop." "You threatening me?" "No," I said calmly. "You threatened the wrong woman." He shifted, doubt cracking through his smugness. "I know the incorporation limits of this HOA. I know the limits of your insurance. And I know what happens when private security impersonates law enforcement in a residential zone." He opened his mouth, closed it. Drop a like if you've ever wanted to stand up to unreasonable rules like this, and subscribe to see how this strategy plays out. The patrol car behind him, white, dented, and self-important, still had its flashing light on. Its magnetic door decal read, "Neighborhood Patrol," but the badge design looked just enough like a county sheriff's emblem to fool a civilian. That's going to matter later. "Where are you watching from?" Because what started as a parking citation is about to end in federal oversight, board resignations, and civil rights investigations. The HOA thought they could police the peace without understanding who the law actually protects. They picked the wrong curb, the wrong garden, the wrong woman, and the wrong man to screw with. The next morning, the garden was clean, too clean. The blood had been power washed from the sidewalk, the curb scrubbed. Even the leaves beneath the bench where Amara had fallen were gone, as if the HOA believed cleanliness could erase violence. I stood on that brick path in the same suit I'd worn the day before, a little dirt on the knees. My wife was still unconscious in the hospital, stable but not speaking. The HOA had already begun its spin cycle. A notice was taped to every mailbox. "Incident under review. Community safety maintained." The language was vague, preemptively defensive, and soaked in bureaucratic evasion. It didn't mention a taser. It didn't mention Marcus Trent. And it certainly didn't mention the 7 months pregnant woman who now had a fetal monitor stitched to her belly. But I wasn't the only one reading that letter. Mrs. Parnell, 2 doors down, stood frozen at her mailbox, eyes scanning the paper like it had teeth. "They're lying," she said before I could speak. I nodded. They did the same thing to my son, she whispered. Last spring, said his license plate frame violated visibility codes. Marcus followed him home with a flashlight. That was just the start. By noon, I'd spoken with 5 residents. 2 had been fined over flowers planted in the wrong pots. 1 had surveillance footage of Marcus letting himself into their fenced backyard, inspecting drainage. None of them had reported it. I didn't want the trouble, Mr. Hahn from the corner unit told me, voice low. He acts like he's above the board, and they let him. A pattern was emerging, not just overreach, permissioned overreach. The HOA board wasn't just allowing Marcus's behavior. They were shielding it, feeding it, empowering it. I pulled up the HOA charter on my phone, dug into the site's footer, and opened the link most homeowners never click, the Board Governance Archive. Buried inside minutes from 2 years ago was an amendment. Security liaison authorized to issue citations and enforce policy under board discretion. Board discretion. There it was, the loophole. They had written Marcus into power and tied him to nothing. No oversight, no external contract, just discretion. Which meant the HOA had deputized a man with no formal training, no legal standing, and no leash. I took screenshots, time-stamped the records, and saved them offline. But I didn't need them for my next move. I needed proof that this wasn't isolated. The community center was closed, but the outdoor message board displayed laminated versions of past violations. I scanned the list of resolved complaints, parking issues, gate security citations, fines for curb interference. Interference? One name popped up 3 times. Arnold DeShields. He was one of the longest-standing residents here, a widower, kept to himself, never attended board meetings. I knocked on his door. He opened after the 3rd knock, wary eyes narrowing until recognition settled in. "You're the one whose wife got hit." "Yes." He opened the door wider. "You're going to need to talk to Selene," he said. "Secretary of the board. She's not like the rest of them." "What do you mean?" "She knows what Marcus is, but she's scared, keeps her head down." That made her dangerous, for them and for me. A conflicted insider with access to internal chats, emails, board strategy. I made a mental note, Selene Voss, potential crack in the wall. Still, I needed to understand the pattern. The HOA wasn't operating like a rogue board. They were functioning like a shielded entity, one that had blurred the line between policy enforcement and authoritarian surveillance. And the neighborhood had learned to stay quiet. That silence ended today. I stepped back into my house. The air felt heavier. The scent of Amara's lavender candle still lingered, and her prenatal vitamins sat untouched on the counter. For a moment, I just stood there. Then I opened my laptop and began logging everything. Times, faces, quotes. I wasn't building a complaint. I was building a case. Because they didn't just tase my wife. They terrorized a neighborhood. And they hid it under the word compliance. Selene Voss didn't answer her door the first time I knocked, or the second. It wasn't until I turned to leave that I heard the latch slide back. Just a crack. "Judge Cross?" Her voice was soft, measured, eyes flickering left and right, like someone half expecting Marcus Trent to materialize behind me. "Yes," I said, "just here to talk. 5 minutes." She hesitated, then opened the door just enough for me to see she still wore her HOA badge clipped to a sweater that didn't quite fit the summer heat. The badge was upside down. "I'm not really supposed to discuss board matters without quorum approval." I didn't step forward. I didn't need to. Her body said more than her mouth did. Shoulders tight, left hand gripping the frame, toes pointed inward like she was already halfway to stepping back. But her eyes, they stayed locked on mine. And they didn't blink. "I'm not asking for board secrets," I said. "I'm asking for truth." Selene glanced down the hallway, then back at me. "It's complicated." "I'm sure it is, especially when you're the only one who doesn't look away." A long pause. Her jaw shifted like she was chewing on something bitter. "He wasn't supposed to have a taser," she whispered. That cracked something open. She stepped back and motioned me in. The air inside was cool and stale, scented with tea and printer ink. Her living room was a collage of paper stacks, HOA newsletters, and sticky notes like little flags of hesitation. I only agreed to stay on because I thought I could temper the others, she said, pouring tea into mismatched mugs. Clarice, the board president, she thinks Marcus is some kind of deterrent, keeps the wrong energy out of the neighborhood. What does that mean? You know what it means. I did. It meant people like Mr. Han got watched. It meant young couples like mine got fined for parking. It meant Marcus Trent became a weapon pointed in one direction only, downhill. Celine sat across from me, her knees bouncing nervously. I tried to bring up concerns in private meetings. They shut me down. Said I was too emotional. That Marcus had full board support. Did you document any of this? She nodded slowly. I keep the meeting minutes, even the ones they think I delete. That was the first real break. I didn't push further. Not yet. She wasn't ready. But the tremor in her hand told me something else. She wanted this to end. She just didn't want to be the one to light the match. You were there when Amara fell, I said quietly. Celine looked down. I didn't know he'd escalate like that. I thought he'd give a citation. Maybe posture, like he always does. But when he drew it, her voice cracked. She looked so scared. She clenched her fists in her lap, as if trying to wring guilt from her own fingers. I wanted to run out, but I froze. You're not the one who tased her. No, but I watched it happen. That was enough. I stood. If you change your mind, if you want to do something more than watch, call me. I handed her my card. She didn't take it at first, but then, with a breath like someone surfacing from a deep pool, she reached for it. I'm scared, she said. They'll bury me. Not if I'm standing next to you. Outside, the sun was starting to fall behind the tall hedges of the HOA's prized Central Plaza. From a distance, it all looked pristine. Homes in neat rows, lawns edged by contract, peace kept by fear. But inside, it was unraveling. Selena wasn't a warrior. She was a witness. And sometimes, witnesses changed everything. The first crack in the board had just formed. 2 days later, the board escalated. Not with an apology, not with silence. With a certified letter taped to my front door, official, sealed, and smug. Notice of escalated violation, curb obstruction, community interference. They fined us $1,250. The justification? Repeated abuse of HOA emergency lanes, disruption of HOA enforcement process, verbal aggression toward board-assigned safety personnel. I stood on my porch in the late afternoon heat, holding the letter like it might combust in my hand. My wife was still recovering, still hooked up to monitors in the high-risk maternity unit, and now the HOA had rewritten the incident like we were the aggressors. This was more than retaliation. This was narrative control. I sat down in the rocker just beneath the overhang and watched the sprinkler system sweep across the trimmed community lawn like nothing had happened, because that's how they operated. Refuse, erase, rewrite. The fine was a challenge, an invitation. They wanted me to fight in their arena. Appeals, resubmissions, neighbor arbitration. A snake pit of process, designed to exhaust, not resolve. But I wasn't walking into their trap. Across the street, a landscaping crew buzzed with trimmers around the board, President Clarice Temple's house. Perfect hedges. A brass eagle on the mailbox. Security camera above her door. Not HOA issued, just hers. She saw me looking. I didn't look away. 30 minutes later, I walked into the HOA's on-site office, tucked behind the clubhouse. Marcus wasn't there, but Clarice was, and she didn't flinch when I walked in. Well, she said, not even looking up from her desk. I figured we'd see you soon. You issued a fine against a woman in the ICU. You were the one parked illegally. The enforcement was unfortunate but justified. There's no posted restriction on that curb. It's red. It's also under review by the Department of Transportation, and there's no formal ordinance filed with the county to restrict it. Clarice folded her hands like she was preparing to bless a meal. We're within our rights. You deputized a man with a taser. Her smile didn't move. He was acting within his discretionary role, which was granted without a vote and without liability coverage, as far as I can tell. That got her attention. I've seen your minutes, I said. I know how that amendment passed, without quorum, at a closed session, with no record of community consent. Clarice stood up slowly. You have no idea what you're stepping into. That's where you're wrong. I know exactly where I'm standing, and you've already slipped. Behind her, on the far wall, hung a corkboard labeled Community Integrity Watch. Photos of vehicles, notes, dates. Most were of young families, immigrant last names, elderly residents. I took a long look. Then I left without another word. That night, I walked the edge of the property lines with a legal pad and a flashlight. I wasn't looking for violations. I was looking for evidence of patterns, security decals on mailboxes, HOA notices taped without envelopes, multiple units with yard flags removed but empty stakes still in place, not one warning posted on Clarice's property, not one documented warning about Marcus. Across a row of duplexes near the south gate, I saw a narrow lot with 4 citations stacked inside a plastic sleeve near the front door. The name on the mailbox, Nadia Bakir. I remembered that name. Amara had spoken to her once about prenatal yoga. The HOA had fined her for group gatherings. Her crime, teaching stretching classes in her backyard. I snapped a photo of the notice dates. They lined up, 2 days before board meetings, a pattern of silencing before official business. This wasn't enforcement. This was control. And if they were bold enough to escalate with me, a federal judge with documentation, what had they done to the residents who couldn't fight back? The board wasn't just shielding Marcus. They were using him strategically, precisely, and with full awareness. They were proud of it, which meant the next phase wouldn't just be legal, it would be federal. The next morning, I returned to the spot, the red curb, the place where Amara's body had hit the bricks. Except this time, I wasn't alone. Lopez, the EMT who'd responded that day, had agreed to meet me, off duty, quiet, no uniform. He leaned against his Honda Civic, arms crossed. I can't give you the report, he said. HIPAA, chain of custody, you know that. I'm not asking for a report, I said, just a memory. He looked down at the sidewalk, then back at me. She didn't resist. She wasn't moving fast. Her knees were already buckling when he fired. Anything about the car? Parked, engine off, hazard lights on, no emergency signage posted, no cones, no posted rule violations, just a man in a knockoff uniform barking threats. That was the piece I needed, because while the HOA loved to pretend they were law adjacent, they had skipped a step, a legal one, a foundational one. Later that afternoon, I filed a request with the Virginia Department of Criminal Justice Services, not as a husband, as a federal judge conducting a formal inquiry into unauthorized use of force authority by a civilian contractor on residential land with public easement status. And within 2 hours, I got my answer. The Neighborhood Protection Detail was not, and had never been, a registered private security organization under state law, which meant Marcus Trent's patrol car, illegal, his authority, fiction, and the HOA board, culpable, because the moment they granted him the power to detain, cite, and neutralize, they'd crossed the line from community governance into impersonation of law enforcement, and under Virginia Code Section 18.2-174, that carried serious weight. I sat back in my chair and stared at the email, not because I was surprised, but because now it was real. They hadn't just overstepped, they'd broken the law, and the consequences wouldn't just be a slap on the wrist. Downstairs, I heard the wind chimes rattle, the same ones Amara hung when we moved in, painted white, flecked with lavender, the same color as her maternity robe still draped over the arm of the couch. I picked it up, smelled it, sat with it. This wasn't about fines anymore. It wasn't about a taser or even the curb. It was about jurisdiction, about who gets to enforce and who gets to define safety. And Marcus Trent, authorized by no one, trained by no one, had played cop under a fake badge with real consequences. My next step wasn't the HOA. It was the Attorney General's office. I drafted the complaint meticulously, cited precedent, linked state law with federal protections, outlined the incident, the board's response, the pattern of racialized enforcement, the silence of the other members, and the board's own meeting minutes. I attached images of Marcus's vehicle and included a notarized statement from Lopez detailing his observations. Carefully worded, but clear. And at the end of the packet, I included a single line. The HOA in question has knowingly engaged in civilian impersonation of law enforcement with the intent to intimidate, detain, and punish residents outside legal jurisdiction. I recommend immediate review and referral to appropriate oversight. By nightfall, I had confirmation it was received, and 30 minutes later, I got a call. Blocked number, no voicemail, just a ring, then silence. I didn't pick up, but I didn't need to, because only 2 people knew I'd filed it that fast, the AG's office, and someone on the inside of the board, which meant Selene wasn't the only one who was starting to sweat. They thought I was building an appeal. I was building a criminal case, and they'd just stepped directly into it. By morning, the gloves were off. 3 more letters arrived, 2 slid into our mailbox, 1 duct taped to our front door. Final warning, non-cooperative conduct violation. Escalation, improper community conduct toward board personnel. Urgent notice, public safety hearing regarding your residency. They weren't even pretending anymore. The last letter accused me of intimidation tactics, legal threats, and disruptions to HOA operations, and requested my presence at an emergency disciplinary hearing at the clubhouse next Friday. They wanted to frame me as a threat, but I didn't flinch. Instead, I picked up the envelope, turned it over, and examined the seal, stamped with a gold HOA crest, not embossed, not issued by any legal entity, just theater. Faux authority dressed in official paper. Amara was still in the hospital. Her OB had moved her to a fetal watch unit. Precautionary, but serious. She hadn't asked for updates on the board. I didn't tell her about the letters. She needed stillness. The baby needed quiet. I'd take the storm. As I scanned the notices for legal flaws, one sentence struck me harder than the rest. Failure to comply will result in a board motion to suspend community voting rights and issue conditional occupancy status. Conditional occupancy. That was the term HOA attorneys used when they wanted to squeeze someone out without invoking full eviction. It wasn't legal, it wasn't binding, but it sounded powerful, and that's what scared people. The idea that their right to live in their home could be made conditional by the same people who fined them for a misplaced flower pot. I walked out to the community square. The wind was sharp for July, but the sky was clear, blue above the garden, bright sun over my mother's bench. It looked like peace. It wasn't. Clarice Temple was there, speaking to a few residents under the gazebo. Her voice was calm, confident, just loud enough for me to catch fragments. Maintaining safety protocols, outside involvement not helping the situation. Disruptive neighbors can't expect immunity. I didn't confront her, not yet. I didn't need to, because I'd already submitted my federal packet. Already received confirmation that it had been escalated to the Civil Rights Division at HUD. And while Clarice polished her speeches and stuck gold seals on paper, a quiet investigation had begun. Still, I needed one more card to lock this in place, proof of their internal knowledge, proof they'd known Marcus wasn't authorized, that they'd enabled it knowingly. Selene hadn't called since our meeting, but I knew she would. Her conscience was louder than her fear. Back at the house, I opened the locked drawer in my study and pulled out the leather folder I hadn't touched since my appointment to the bench. Inside were court contacts, professional affidavits, and case precedents, evidence built on silence broken. I flipped through until I found the contact. Eleanor Sharp, State Compliance Auditor, Office of Consumer Affairs. I'd worked with her once before, when a private senior facility violated ADA standards. She knew how to move quietly, and how to make things very loud, very fast when it was time. I drafted a single message. Ongoing impersonation of law enforcement under HOA authorization. Confirmed use of force. Civilian injured. Unlicensed security operation in gated community. Inquiries requested. Attached, a photo of Marcus's vehicle, the Taser model specs, and a copy of the board's recent citation threats. Then I sent it. It wasn't just about punishment anymore. It was about precedent. Because if this board could weaponize a taser and wrap it in fine print, so could hundreds of others. They needed to be the last. I stepped out onto the porch, watching the breeze stir the garden beyond the hedges. My mother's bench stood in sunlight, untouched now, but scarred in memory. They wanted to make me kneel. They didn't realize I'd already stood in bigger rooms. And when I stand, I bring storms with me. Selene called at 6:12 p.m. I was sitting by Amara's hospital bed, my fingers resting on the thin pulse monitor wrapped around her wrist. The rhythmic beeping from the fetal monitor was steady, thank God. But I hadn't left her side in 2 days. When the phone buzzed, I almost let it ring. Then I saw her name. Judge Cross. Her voice was tight. I don't know how long I have to talk. I'm listening. I found something. I wasn't supposed to have it. She was whispering now, breath coming quick. It's a printout from our encrypted Slack channel. The board uses it to discuss things we don't put in the minutes. I always save backups on a USB drive, just in case. You're not safe talking about this on your phone. I'm not at home. I'm at the print center off Interstate 66. I already deleted the drive, but I emailed one copy to myself from a public machine. What's on it? Her pause stretched too long. They knew about Marcus. They knew he had a taser. They joked about it, called him HOA SWAT, said it would keep certain residents in line. They even talked about how to handle media if anything went wrong. The room felt colder suddenly. Even the soft hum of the hospital monitors seemed to fade. Did they reference my wife by name? I asked. Celine's voice cracked. Yes. She emailed it an hour later. The subject line read only, I'm sorry. The file was a scanned PDF of an internal board thread dated 2 weeks before the incident. Clarice Temple had written, if Trent gets rough again, we'll frame it as unfortunate but necessary. People like Cross don't get to weaponize their status just because they married into the neighborhood. Another message from board member Travis Dill followed. If we push him, he'll either fold or go nuclear. Either way, we tighten grip. Better to lose one house than lose authority. There it was, cold, deliberate, preemptive. I printed every page, numbered them, logged metadata. That night, I drove the packet to the AG's field office myself. I didn't trust couriers, didn't trust digital submission. And when I placed the file into the evidence intake window, I looked the clerk in the eye. This is internal board communication authorizing unlawful force and targeting a federal officer's family. Her expression changed. Professional interest gave way to something sharper. She stood. One moment, sir. She returned 2 minutes later with a supervisor, who escorted me to a secure room and began a formal statement log. The words spilled easily. Not with anger, just precision. I'd been preparing it for days. Timeline, violation, threats, communications, witnesses, and finally, Selene. I didn't name her directly, but I described her role, her fear, and the risk she took. She's not a whistleblower yet, I said. But she's close. The supervisor nodded, scribbling. We'll escalate to civil integrity and licensing enforcement. They've handled similar HOA abuse cases. When I left, the city was quiet. I parked outside Selene's place around 10 p.m. I didn't knock. I just watched through the car window. Her porch light was off, curtains drawn, no movement inside. But in her front yard, in the dark, her HOA badge hung from the mailbox, snapped in half, still dangling by the clip. That was her answer. The next morning, news broke. Federal judge's family targeted by HOA over unlicensed enforcement officer. Investigation underway. Local station, small segment, but it lit the match. 3 neighbors stopped me on my walk later that day. Quiet, cautious, but supportive. One slipped me a phone number. My brother's a reporter, national desk. If this goes bigger, he'll listen. I nodded, took the number. The board wanted this buried. Selene just helped me exhume it. I didn't wait for the board to respond to the news coverage. I knew they would. Their silence was a strategy. Buy time, consult lawyers, plan their next move behind closed doors. But I wasn't giving them space to breathe. I had already shifted into the next phase, the preparation phase. My skills weren't in yelling or picket signs. I didn't need to shout to be heard. I needed only one thing, a chain of proof that could close the loop on every abuse, every decision, every silence the board had used to weaponize Marcus Trent. First, I filed a secondary request with the Virginia Department of Professional and Occupational Regulation. It wasn't about Marcus this time. It was about the HOA itself. I wanted a review of their incorporation documents, their insurance filings, and their liability clauses as a registered governing body. 48 hours later, I received confirmation that their status was pending audit. The wording was careful, but the message was clear. The board was now on the radar. Second, I reread the bylaws, line by line, word by word, and buried under Article 7, subsection D, I found the exact clause I needed. Any board decision involving security measures or enforcement actions must be approved by a majority quorum of 5, including written notice to all members and recorded public vote. The Taser vote, the Marcus appointment, none of it had quorum. Clarice and 2 others had enacted it in a closed-door executive session, with no minutes, no posted record, and no legal grounds. The board had overstepped not just morally, but structurally. I copied that clause and attached it to the HUD report. I sent it to the AG. I included it in a memo to Eleanor Sharp at Consumer Affairs. No accusations, just raw documentation. It wasn't just Marcus under scrutiny now. It was the entire board. Third, I requested a county-level tax audit of HOA funds. It was a long shot. But if Marcus had been compensated under the table or reimbursed for equipment the HOA didn't legally authorize, it would show up somewhere. And I had a contact in the auditor's office, former clerk. We'd crossed paths during an election compliance case 3 years ago. Flag anything labeled community patrol or safety enforcement reimbursement, I told him. He didn't even ask why. While the paperwork moved behind the scenes, I made myself visible in the community. I walked the sidewalks every morning, not out of pride, but presence. And people noticed. Nadia Bakir waved from her driveway. Mr. Hahn crossed the street and handed me a folded note with 4 other names. Neighbors who'd been fined, threatened, followed. I didn't chase them. They came to me. I'm not asking you to speak, I told them. I'm just asking you to be ready. Because the board would respond. They always did. Power only doubles down when it's cornered, and I wanted them to know they were running out of places to hide. Back at home, Amara had finally been discharged. She moved slowly, holding her belly like it needed cradling even off the hospital bed. She didn't ask about the board, didn't want updates. But that night, as we sat on the porch in silence, she spoke. You're not doing this just for me. No, I said quietly. I'm doing it because this is our home, and no one should be afraid to live where they love. She nodded once, then leaned into my shoulder, and for the first time in weeks, I felt stillness that wasn't silence. It was permission. They had tried to isolate me with fines and letters and threat masquerading as process, but now I had what they feared most: structure, witnesses, and law. I parked outside the county records office just after 8 a.m., walking in with a worn manila folder tucked under my arm. Inside were statements, excerpts from the bylaws, Cellini's printouts, and the annotated audit clause from Article 7. I wasn't filing them yet. I was here for leverage. Inside, tucked behind a glass partition and rows of gray filing cabinets, sat a woman I hadn't seen in years, Carla Ivers, senior clerk and records archivist. We'd worked adjacent cases once, back when I was still new to the federal bench, and she was processing election disclosures. She looked up as I entered, squinting through her half-moon glasses. I know that face, she said. Didn't expect to see it in this building. I need confirmation on a quorum breach, I said. HOA board action with enforcement implications, no public record filed, no vote disclosed. Her eyebrows rose. Which association? I handed her the folder. Fairbrook Glen, officers Clarice Temple, Travis Dill, and Marcus Trent as acting liaison. She pulled it toward her and flipped through the contents. This is a lot. They authorize force without quorum. They hired a man who's not licensed as law enforcement, gave him tools, and then tried to bury it under policy language. I need formal verification they didn't file the authorization with your office. If they did, I'll walk away. She gave me a look. You already know they didn't. I do, but I need a certified void to close the gap. Carla tapped her keyboard, scanned the database, and turned her monitor toward me. Empty fields, No entry filed on Marcus Trent. No security amendment logged in 2 years. No notice of enforcement delegation. She printed the result, signed it, stamped it. "This is your lever." I tucked it into the folder. It was time to begin closing the jaws. That afternoon, I returned to the community clubhouse, the same building where they'd posted the hearing notice. The glass doors still bore taped flyers about maintaining order and respecting HOA procedures. Inside, it was quiet. A few residents sat in the lounge area, eyes shifting as I passed. One man nodded, subtle, cautious, but it was enough. They were watching, waiting. I moved past the lounge and entered the common room where the board often held closed sessions. No one stopped me, not yet. They weren't ready for confrontation. That would come later. I placed a copy of the certified non-filing on the message board, next to the HOA's latest bulletin about the emergency hearing. Then I pinned a second copy to the corkboard labeled Community Enforcement Policy. On top of it, I wrote in clean block letters, "This policy has not been lawfully filed or ratified under county code. A full investigation is underway." It took less than an hour for the board to react. Clarice sent out a group text to the HOA mailing list, attempting to downplay the document as misinformation. But by then, the copy had already been photographed and shared in the local neighborhood forum. Celine messaged me soon after. "Celine, Clarice is calling an emergency private board meeting. No notice posted. Just got the invite. Should I go?" Me, "Yes. Take notes. Listen only." Celine, "She's panicking. They think you leaked it to the press." Me, "Let them think that. The real storm hasn't arrived yet." Because what they didn't know was that the state audit had already triggered an alert to their insurance provider. If the board had violated their own structure by deputizing someone like Marcus, the community's liability coverage could be voided. That's how HOA power collapses. Not with shouting, but with structural withdrawal. No insurance, no protection, no authority. That night, I sat on the porch with Amara as the sun dipped low behind the oaks. The garden lay quiet beneath the shadows, but I didn't see the spot where she fell anymore. I saw a courtroom. I saw board members answering questions under oath. I saw power being peeled back, layer by layer, until all that remained was truth. They wanted obedience. They were about to get oversight. The boardroom was already full when I arrived, not with residents yet, but with presence, with silence that felt curated. 5 chairs behind a long folding table, draped with the HOA's navy blue banner. Clarice Temple sat at the center, hands folded neatly atop a stack of prepared remarks. Marcus Trent stood behind her, arms crossed, wearing the same uniform, gray polo with the HOA crest, tactical boots, utility belt, still clinging to the illusion of authority. But this time, no taser. That had been quietly confiscated during the preliminary review. The moment I stepped through the glass doors, Clarice's smile tightened. "Mr. Cross, I see you've chosen to attend after all." "I wouldn't miss it," I said, handing her a sealed envelope. For the record, inside, copies of the state's preliminary report, HUD's formal acknowledgement of review, and the certified documentation from the county clerk's office declaring the board's enforcement policy legally unregistered. Clarice passed it to Travis Dill without opening it. "This hearing," she began, raising her voice slightly so the handful of early attendees in the room could hear, "is to address escalating conduct and violations of community protocol by one of our residents. This meeting is not a court of law. It is a procedural forum governed by our internal charter." "That's not true," I said, "because your charter was breached the moment you allowed Marcus Trent to operate as security without formal quorum, public record, or certified insurance oversight." Marcus tensed behind her. Clarice didn't blink. "This is an internal matter." "No," I replied, setting a single-page notice on the table before them. "This is a federal matter now. You've used your positions to empower unlawful impersonation of law enforcement, resulting in physical harm to a pregnant resident. You've issued fines without legal standing and withheld records from residents requesting review." The door behind me opened again. This time, people came in. Not just 1 or 2, but dozens. Neighbors, residents who hadn't shown their faces in months. Mr. Hahn, Nadia Bakir, even Mrs. Parnell from 2 doors down. They filled the folding chairs and stood in the back, quiet, alert, waiting. Clarice looked up, startled. I wasn't aware this was a community-wide meeting. It wasn't, I said. But transparency tends to invite an audience. Travis leaned toward Clarice, whispered something sharp. Her hand tightened around her notes. Celine entered last. She didn't go to the board side of the table. She walked to mine, stood just behind me. Her face was pale but resolute. I have a statement, she said. As acting HOA secretary. Clarice's voice cracked slightly. Celine, that's not... I have a right to speak. She pulled out a folder and opened it. I hereby submit, as required under Section 9 of our charter, the records from our private board chat log, dated over the past 16 months, documenting conversations around unauthorized enforcement delegation, intentional, suppression of resident rights, and premeditated responses to any legal escalation. She laid the printed messages flat on the table. Including this quote, she said, voice unwavering. We push him until he snaps. A judge losing his cool makes us look stronger. Clarice flushed. I stepped forward. For the record, that quote was dated the morning after my wife was tased. You were already planning how to spin the aftermath. A hush fell. Even Marcus shifted now, sweat forming at his temples. Someone in the back gasped. I could feel the air change. No more performance. No more illusion of process. Clarice tried to gather her voice. These records weren't reviewed. They will be, I said, by the Attorney General's office, and HUD, and Consumer Affairs, and anyone else I bring to this room. A beat passed. Then Celine pulled her badge from her sweater and dropped it on the table. I resign, she said. Clarice sat back, silent. No one clapped, no one needed to, because in that moment, the theater of power collapsed, and everyone in the room knew this wasn't their board anymore. The news vans arrived before dawn. By 6 a.m., 3 of them were parked outside the Fairbrook Glen clubhouse, antennas raised, tripods mounted, lenses pointed toward the entrance like it was a courthouse. And, in a way, it was. Because this wasn't just a board meeting anymore. It was a reckoning. By 9 a.m., the line of residents stretched from the front steps down the sidewalk, curving past the rose trellis Clarice once had declared restricted landscaping. There were parents holding toddlers, retired couples with lawn chairs, nurses still in scrubs. Half of them didn't speak, but their presence was louder than any sign. Inside, the folding chairs were gone. They had been replaced by standing room only, residents packed shoulder to shoulder. The air was humid with anticipation, the silence charged. Clarice Temple entered at exactly 9:15, flanked by Travis Dill and the 2 remaining board members. Marcus Trent wasn't with them. She walked straight to the table, lips pressed tight, a manila folder in hand. But this time, there was no banner draped across the table, no HOA logo behind her, just a plain wall, bare, unclaimed. Celine stood at the front of the room, calm, clipboard in hand. Per charter protocol, she began, voice steady. This emergency meeting has been publicly requested by more than 20% of residents. As such, board leadership is subject to formal community review under Clause 11, subsection C. Clarice interrupted. We dispute the grounds for this hearing. A voice rose from the back. Mr. Hahn. We don't. Then another. She lied to us. She let him patrol with a taser. They fined my niece for a plastic swing set. The dam broke. Dozens of voices surged forward, not shouted, but firm, controlled, measured, every one of them carrying receipts, photographs, emails, printed citations. Some were trembling, others defiant. And Clarice finally saw what she had built. Not authority, not order, fear. And it was crumbling now, brick by brick, in front of her. Celine cleared her throat. Due to the accumulation of formal complaints and confirmed breaches in procedural transparency, I motion for an immediate community vote to remove Clarice Temple and all current board members from their positions, effective immediately, pending audit resolution. Clarice's hand shook slightly as she gripped the table. You have no authority. I do, Celine said, holding up a printed page. Article 14, Emergency Reorganization Clause. Ratified during your administration, ironically. Clarice looked at Travis, then the crowd, and she saw the truth. There would be no saving this. I stepped forward then, not to gloat, not to argue, but to mark the moment. You thought you could operate in the dark, hide behind bylaws, rewrite what people saw, but you forgot something. Clarice stared at me, jaw set. You forgot that power only exists when people agree to be silent. Celine began the vote. Simple slips, yes or no. In under 15 minutes, the count was complete. The result, 98-4 in favor of full board removal. Clarice didn't speak again. She simply stood, gathered her things, and walked out through a corridor of eyes. No one shouted. No one blocked her path, but not a single person looked away. That was louder than any outburst could have been. Outside, the cameras flashed. Clarice turned her face. Travis followed, eyes down. The other two stayed behind, lingering in stunned disbelief. Back inside, Celine turned to the crowd. We'll organize a transition vote in the coming week. Until then, this board is dissolved. Oversight and legal response will continue via county and state agencies. There was no applause, just a deep exhaled breath from the room, like something poisonous had been pulled from its lungs. I didn't speak again. I didn't need to. The people had spoken, not in anger, in consequence. Fairbrook Glen would never forget what had been allowed. But more importantly, it would remember what happened when someone finally said enough. The sun rose over Fairbrook Glen, quiet and clean. The clubhouse doors stood open, not guarded, not watched, just open. No banners, no warnings, no surveillance flyers. Just people walking in and out, carrying paperwork and folding chairs, the way a neighborhood should. The oak tree swayed in the wind near the garden. Amara sat beside me on the bench, one hand on her belly, the other wrapped around mine. The plaque beneath us read, Amara's Rest, for every mother who wasn't believed. It had been Celine's idea, quiet, simple, final. The vote to rename the garden passed unanimously 3 days after the board was dissolved. No debate, no opposition. Just a silent room of heads nodding, as if the act itself was the apology no one had said out loud. The audits were still ongoing. HUD had launched a formal inquiry into HOA abuse and unlicensed enforcement delegation across the state. Marcus Trent was facing misdemeanor charges for impersonation and unlawful use of force. The HOA's insurer had withdrawn coverage retroactively, citing willful misrepresentation. But none of that mattered in this moment, because today, Amara walked the length of that garden without fear, without having to look over her shoulder, without Marcus's shadow carved into the sidewalk. The house was quiet again, not the silence of fear, but of peace. Neighbors waved now. Some brought flowers, some offered apologies. Others just nodded, silent acknowledgments between people who knew how easily safety could be stolen. Celine had declined to run for the new board. Instead, she became the volunteer liaison for resident mediation. She said she was better at listening than leading. She was right. And Fairbrook Glen listened now. To parents worried about their kids biking too far. To seniors wondering if their fences could be painted a different color. To people who had once felt watched every time they opened their front doors. The bylaws were rewritten. The charter was revised. The word enforcement was removed from every section that didn't deal with actual maintenance or safety regulations. And a new clause was added. No resident shall be subjected to punitive action by any non-law enforcement individual using devices, language, or tactics designed to intimidate, threaten, or control under the guise of community protection. That clause had my name at the bottom, not out of ego, but memory, because one day our daughter will grow up here. She'll ask about the plaque, about the bench, about why the garden was named after her mother. And I'll tell her that peace isn't something you inherit. It's something you defend, with law, with truth, with people who refuse to be silent. I'll tell her that her mother was brave even in pain, and that her home exists because people chose to stop being afraid of paperwork and start holding power accountable. We stayed on the bench a while longer. The birds returned to the hedge. The breeze carried laughter from the open clubhouse doors. For once, there was nothing to plan, nothing to file, nothing to prepare for. Only rest, only breath, only legacy. If you want more stories of homeowners standing up to HOA tyranny, hit subscribe right now, share your story in the comments, and let me know where you're watching from.